Okay, so I'm here to say, don't be scared of sourdough. Now, why would I come out with such an extraordinary statement? Because it's like anything, right? Once you get to know something, it's not scary anymore. So let's get to know sourdough. There's a couple of things though. I'm just going to flag this right from the start because the language itself is odd with sourdough. We're going to be talking about how to feed your mother, what she smells like, and whether or not you can actually keep her alive. Stay with me. Okay, so if you're a sourdough maker already, a lot of this stuff is going to be yada, yada, yada. But that's cool. I'm going to presume that you've never made sourdough before. So anything that wants to go over your head, that's cool. But I'm going to make sure that if you haven't made sourdough before, you're not going to be scared to. Because honestly, once you know this technique, everyone can just be making bread at home. Let's talk about your mother. Actually, let's talk about my mother, because that's who's here. There are things to remember with sourdough. We have the mother. The mother is fed and becomes the BIGA, and the BIGA is fed and becomes the dough. They're the three things you need to remember, and if we keep those clear, everything's going to work out fine. So, first thing, again, we're back to the odd language, but that's okay. Make sure you smell your mother, so that you know that this is on track. The other thing to test for, and this is brilliant because it's a visual, is to know whether your fed mother, which is now a BIGA, is ready to go. You just pop it in some water, and if it floats, it's ready to go. Don't muck around with cups and spoons and measurements like that. Get yourself a set of scales. It's so much easier and your bread will work. Okay, so I've just put 750 grams of water in there. And then here's my mother that's been fed to become a BIGA. So I fed this last night and left it overnight. Equal amounts of water and flour, and I'm going to put 150 grams into a whole 2 kilo loaf of sourdough. So you don't need much of this. So this is the float test. As you can see, we pass. My mother passes. If you find that your BIGA goes to the bottom, I'm sorry, but don't make bread from that because it's just going to be an uphill battle the entire time. So we've got a really good looking BIGA here. Now what do you do with the rest of the BIGA? Well, this remains as your ongoing mother, your forever mother, whatever you want to call it. And next time you want to make bread, the night before, you feed your mother. Equal parts water and flour, and then that makes you BIGA. So don't get rid of this. This is the holy grail. You need to make sure you keep your mother alive at all times. Some people say that you have to feed your mother every day. My mother has a bit more of a fasting process than that because I just don't get around to feeding my mother every day, but I do try and feed it twice before I want to make bread. All right, so we're at the stage where we know that we're going to have good bread because the BIGA is floating. All right, so we're going to add salt and we're going to add flour, and that's all sourdough is. Mother turned into BIGA with water, salt and flour. Nothing scary there. If you're making a white flour sourdough most of the time, and I think that's a good place to start, so let's just presume you're going to do that. Feed your mother to make a BIGA with the flour that you're going to use in your sourdough. Now, let's do the flour. You want to have a big bowl for this. I'm just going to tear my weight, my scales back to a 0 weight so that I can get my salt right. You might think that an extra gram of salt is no big deal, but it is in sourdough. So please don't undersalt sourdough. There's nothing worse. It tastes like pap. So we want to make sure it's really well salted. I put 25 grams in. Some people might balk at that. 25 grams of salt. I use a Himalayan salt, so that makes me feel better about things. Now, 1 kilo of flour. Easy. All right, that's it. Now we're just going to stir this and make sure that all of the flour has met all of the water. Don't want any of those little dry sandy pockets. And once it is mixed, you're kind of done. at this point. I mean, seriously, it's not a tricky thing. The most difficult part about making sourdough is making sure that your mother doesn't die. Well, we're kind of good with that, aren't we? All of the flour's been sucked up into the liquid, and we have this not ready, but we have a lovely mass that's pulled together. It's not sticking to the outsides of the bowl. It still has its work to do, but you don't. You can have a cup of tea now. Right, well that's a half an hour then. Okay, every half hour for 3 hours, this is what you're going to do. Up to you about the tea part. So turning it, not kneading it, but turning it is important. But all that actually is what I'm doing right now. Put your spatula, if you imagine it in quarters, put your spatula on one side, turn it a quarter, pull it up. You kind of dip down and pull the dough up. And what that does is help to activate the gluten. It's a fancy pants way of saying that it, you know, gets that lovely stretchiness and sticks together. And then it also, and I only recently understood this, exposes the rest of the dough to the air, because that's what it needs to feed. The sourdough culture needs to feed and be exposed to the air, and then you get all of that fantastic activation. So it is important, but that's it. That's one turn. Then you cover it back up. Look, this is not in the books either, the whole glad wrap part. This is another aspect to sourdough success. You need to have a consistent temperature and humidity, and that's just really difficult to do for most people in their general kitchens, and I'm totally with you on that. So just doing this makes all the difference. So we've done one turn, and now we're back to drinking tea for half an hour. Right, another half hour. Okay, this is going to be the final turn. So I've done 5 of these every half hour for 3 hours. This is my 6th turn. You don't want to be too rough with this, okay? It's your mother in there. So we want to make sure that those beautiful air bubbles that have already formed are not just going to be popped out of there, that they can stay in there, because then when you slice your sourdough and you see those gorgeous holes, that's good sourdough. All right, so we've done all of the turns, and now we're going to leave this to prove without any hassle. Leave it alone. I know you're going to want to have a little look, and that's fine. You can see through the glad wrap, but leave it covered. Leave it in that space where it's nice and warm, but not too hot. And what you're looking for is to see that it's increased in size by about 1/3. This could take 2 hours. It could take 2 hours and 23 minutes. It could take 3 hours and 23 minutes. It's going to be a feel thing with sourdough. But if you go for the has it increased by 1/3, then I think you're going to be on the right track. That's the only thing that I would say about sourdough is based on your instinct, your connection to the bread, rather than seeing what's on a set of scales. So let's leave that, and then we'll come back in probably 2 hours, have a little look, see where it's at. If it needs longer, leave it alone. We've got the right growth that we want, and now we're going to shape it, and then I'm going to rest it again. There's a good reason for this, and I'm going to tell you why, because otherwise you're sitting there going, what is that good reason for this? The reason that I divide things up across 3 days is simply because that's the only way I can handle making bread every week. You can feed the mother the first day, the day before you want to make your bread, feed the mother with equal parts water and flour, leave it on the bench, that does its thing. You go and do your thing. Then the next day, you do your dough mix. So do the BIGA test, make sure it's floating. Yep, good to go, move on from that point. And then let it sit there. You've done your turns. It's not too taxing to do a few turns. And then I'm going to shape this, but I'm going to put it in the fridge overnight. I find it way easier to deal with the dough because it's cooler, and so it's not all over the shop. And then you also have something that just slows down the ferment process. If you're not so great at being able to visually decide when the bread's ready to go into the oven or not, we're not all born with that talent, I've discovered, then you can actually slow down the process and feel like you have some more time to decipher when it's ready to go into the oven, which is generally, you take it out the fridge, leave it for an hour while the oven's heating up, and then you're good to go. All right, did we mention that without a cast iron pan, you're kind of buggered when it comes to making sourdough? So we're going to do the shaping and then we're going to wrap our dough and put it in the fridge. The reason I'm putting this out front and center is because we need to get the right fabric. Linen, 100% linen, that's all you need to know. So you want to have a completely plain cloth that is big enough. I'm suggesting that this is probably 40 by 40 centimetres. In fact, I think that's what I said to my mum when I asked her if she could please whip up one of those. Okay, I'm just going to grab my other brilliant device, super technical. Everyone has these amazing bread baskets. I don't. I just use a colander. Look at the shape of that. That's a beautiful bread shape. So here's the process. This guy goes into this guy. At this point, I flour it here. You can find your way around this for whatever works best for you, but I would suggest using a starchy flour rather than using the same flour that you've used in your sourdough. Starchy flour means that you're not going to have the cloth sticking to the dough. And plus, you know when you get the sourdough out or you go to sourdough shops and you see those amazing loaves where they've been cut and then that beautiful contrast with that flour that you think, how did they get that beautiful contrasting flour dusty look? It's using the starchy flours, either rice flour, which is what I'm using, or arrowroot or tapioca, anything like that. Okay, and then you kind of have to be a bit dexterous with this next point because you know how I mentioned before that the fridge saves the flour from being all over the shop? This is the part where the dough is all over the shop, so you kind of have to work a little bit quickly. Okay, let's bring this out onto a floured board. Use your fingers to just gently tuck underneath and pull it over the top of itself, turning it a quarter each time. Kind of similar to what we did with the turns in the bowl. Okay, you can see how lovely and stretchy that is. Right, now we have ourselves something that looks like a loaf. If you want, you can get all sourdoughy. I don't know, whatever the chefy term is for making sourdough, and pull that very gently, just pull the dough towards you, and what that does is it just tensions, it's another little sourdough language term, it tensions the outside so that you're going to get this amazing crust. You're almost wanting to hold the sourdough while it's doing its thing. It's growing inside, but you just want to hold it, contain it, hug it while it's happening, because then when it hits the oven, boom, you have this amazing spring, which is what it's called, oven spring. Gentle, gentle, gentle. Always think about being gentle. Okay, let's say that that's been sitting there for 10 minutes. I've had another cup of tea, now I've come back. So lift that up, flip it over so that the top is on the bottom. And then I do this little thing where I just want to make sure that it's really sealed at the top. And again, it's another gentle way of tensioning the dough. So you just kind of pull the sides up, stick them all together. Then that means none of that beautiful bubblage is going to get out of there. Okay, I usually dust the top as well. You don't have to go overboard with the flour because it's remarkable. I know that you're not going to trust that that cloth isn't going to stick to the dough, but I can tell you it won't because of the method that we've used. I love this part. You can get all furoshiki. All right, so we just fold the cloth over, not too tightly. You don't want to strangle your mother in there. Just a hug, remember, we're hugging, not restricting. So that's ready to go into the fridge. I'm done for the day, and then we're going to bake bread tomorrow morning and wake up to that amazing smell. All right, out of the fridge, and we're going to go into the Le Creuset. So if you don't have a little cast iron, when I say little, actually it needs to be a reasonable size. If you know what size your colander or your bread basket's going to be, you need to make sure that the cast iron oven is big enough to fit that in. Otherwise, there's going to be a very sad face when you get to that point. So that's been heating in the oven. The thing about doing sourdough at home is that you want to mimic what happens in a sourdough bakery. So you want that oven absolutely blasting. Maximum temperature, and let it heat up for a decent amount of time. I know that that seems over the top, but if you don't, you're not going to get the amazing spring, that incredible crust that we all love about sourdough, and that's the reason we usually go and buy it. So the cast iron Le Creuset has been heating up. That's really hot. And what that does is almost create an oven within the oven for you. So you're just going to put the bread in there and it's going to go nuts, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so let's unwrap our beautiful little loaf, and then you're going to figure this out any way you can. It took me a little while, but this is the best way that I can think. Okay, ready? So we do this, and then no sticking with the cloth, which is brilliant, and then you score it. You're going to need some razor blades. Don't do this with a normal knife, or you'll be really disappointed with the outcome. So firm, but not too violent. You want to just make sure that you cut through, but you don't want to leave a chasm in there. So everyone asks about how I get that look on my bread whenever I post this on Instagram. It's that easy. You run it that way, you run it that way, you run it that way, you run it that way. Okay, so this guy's hot, which is the reason that I always use the baking paper underneath. So make sure your baking paper is big enough to support the loaf, and then very gently, so that you don't burn your hands or get the loaf near it, lid back on, and then into the oven. That's going to be in there for 50 minutes. This is how I do it. 50 minutes, and after 50 minutes, take the lid off. Then do another 15. Another 15 to 20, depends on what flour you've used, but because we're just focusing on the white flour thing first, let's do 50 minutes with the lid on, and that contains all of the moisture so that as the bread is rising, it's not just cracking, because it has enough moisture around the crust to be able to expand without breaking. But the time that you cook it with the lid on is always, always longer than the time that you cook it with the lid off, because that's just about getting that amazing crust. All right, all right, all right. This is the best moment. This is the best moment. Actually, when you take the lid off after 50 minutes, that vies to be the best moment. But when you smell it, that's got to trump everything else. This is hot, be careful, okay? But when you've got the baking paper in there, that's going to help you to be able to get that out. It's never glamorous nor graceful, but that's okay, because we've arrived at bread. Look at that guy. Huh? You're not scared anymore, are you? Oh, you know what? I need to tell you one more thing. If you just saw the inside of my Le Creuset and you had a little bit of a moment, that's because I have used this for years as a bread making oven. You're going to have to dedicate this to the cause, because it looks like this really quickly, and you know what? It's worth it. So get yourself one of these that just becomes the bread. Okay, now I feel like you know everything. Oh, and If you do give this a go, please let me know. Send me a photo, or actually if you run into trouble and you want to send me a photo, is this about right? How's this looking? Maybe not incrementally through the whole process, but just give me one photo because it's brilliant. And I can tell you that once you master this, you feel like, well, really, you could just about do anything. Enjoy your bread making.